Della had signed up to study plants, not babysit apex predators who could disembowel her before she finished screaming. Yet here she was, standing in the youth wing of the bright horizon, surrounded by creatures that made Earth's big cats look like house pets. The colony ship hummed through the void between star systems, carrying its precious cargo of hope and idealism. The Unity Initiative. Multiple species learning to coexist. Their young raised together in harmony. A beautiful dream that conveniently ignored the fact that some of those young were literally designed by evolution to eat things that looked suspiciously like Della. "You'll be fine," the coordinator had told her that morning, clearly lying through her teeth. "We're short-staffed. Just supervise for a few hours. They're already fed." Already fed. As if that was supposed to be reassuring. The Recti cubs noticed her the moment she entered their section. Of course they did. Predator species didn't miss much, and a lone human probably registered on their instincts somewhere between curious anomaly and squishy snack. There were 3 of them. Siblings, she'd been briefed. Feline humanoid, covered in sleek fur that ranged from deep charcoal to burnished copper. They moved with that liquid grace that made every gesture look effortless and vaguely threatening. Retractable claws, naturally. Fangs that were definitely not decorative. Eyes that tracked movement with unnerving precision. The largest one, Hurik, rose from where he'd been sprawled across a cushioned platform. His ears swiveled forward, locked onto her. The other 2, Plix and Tumba, flanked him within seconds. Pack behavior. Or pride behavior. Whatever the correct terminology was for creatures that could probably spell coordinated attack before they could spell their own names. They began to circle. Not obviously, not threateningly, just adjusting their positions, maintaining distance, watching, testing. Della had been briefed on this too. Don't run. Don't show fear. Maintain calm. Speak normally. Right. Speak normally to the murder kittens. Sure. "Hello," she said, keeping her voice level. "I'm Della. I'll be helping out today while your regular instructors are handling the upper decks situation." Hurric's head tilted. "You're human." Not a question. An observation delivered in a voice that was surprisingly articulate for someone who probably practiced their alphabet with words like hunt and kill. "I am," Della confirmed. "You're very small," Plix added, circling to her left. His tail swished behind him, a metronome of curiosity. "Compared to you, yes." "And soft," Tumba said from her right. The smallest of the 3, but still large enough to be intimidating. Her whiskers twitched. No fur, no claws, no proper teeth. Della resisted the urge to point out that humans had perfectly adequate teeth. Thank you very much, even if they weren't designed to tear through raw meat. Instead, she smiled. "We make do." The cubs exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind that came from growing up in close quarters with people who understood your every micro-expression. Then they sat. All 3 of them, simultaneously, forming a loose semicircle around her. Apparently, she'd passed some kind of test. The next 2 hours were surprisingly uneventful. Della supervised as the cubs worked through their enrichment activities, which seemed to involve a lot of pouncing, wrestling, and destroying practice dummies with disturbing efficiency. She answered their questions, which ranged from genuinely curious to clearly designed to see if they could make her uncomfortable. Do humans really eat plants? Yes, and proud of it. Can you run fast? Not even remotely. Have you ever killed anything? Only my succulent collection through aggressive overwatering, and she wasn't sure that counted. She'd brought her work with her, naturally. a collection of botanical samples that needed cataloging and preservation. The specimens were already pressed and dried, just needed proper labeling and storage. She sat up at one of the side tables, trying to stay unobtrusive while keeping the cubs in her peripheral vision. Della pulled out her supplies: specimen sheets, archival paper, twine for bundling, labels, and her scissors. The scissors were nothing special. Standard utility scissors, slightly worn handles, blades that had been sharpened once too often, and now had that slightly irregular edge that came from years of use. She'd had them since graduate school. They were comfortable, familiar, an extension of her hand. She began working, trimming excess paper from around the mounted specimens, cutting lengths of twine to bundle related samples, snipping labels to size. Snip, snip, snip. The room went quiet. Della glanced up. All three cubs had frozen mid-activity. Hurrick had been in the middle of scaling a climbing structure. Plix had been batting at a suspended target. Toowoomba had been examining something in the corner. Now they were all statues, their attention laser-focused on her hands. More specifically, on the scissors. "Ah," Della said eloquently. "Everything okay?" Hurrick descended from the climbing structure with the kind of slow, deliberate movement that suggested intense concentration. He approached her table, stopping a respectful distance away. His eyes were fixed on the scissors like they were a religious artifact. "What?" he said slowly. "Is that?" Della looked down at the scissors in her hand. "These?" "Scissors. For cutting." "Cutting," Plix repeated, moving closer as well. "With blades?" "Well, yes. 2 blades, actually. They work together." Della demonstrated, opening and closing the scissors in the air. The cubs tracked the movement like it was the most fascinating thing they'd ever witnessed. Toomba crept forward, her eyes wide. "But you're not using claws or teeth. You're using a thing." "A tool," Della corrected gently. "Humans use a lot of tools. We're not built as well as you are for cutting or tearing, so we make things to help us." The concept seemed to genuinely perplex them. Hurrick's ears flattened slightly, the recti equivalent of a confused frown. "You make cutting?" "Sort of." Della set down the scissors and picked up a piece of thick paper. "Watch. I'll try to tear this with just my hands." She gripped the paper and pulled. It tore, eventually, but the edge was ragged and uneven, and it took genuine effort. She held up the mangled result. "Now with scissors." She picked up another piece of identical paper, positioned the scissors, and cut. A clean, straight line. Effortless. She held up both pieces for comparison. The cubs stared like she'd just performed actual magic. "The scissors make it easy," Della explained. "They give me precision and leverage. 2 blades working against each other, meeting at a point. The force is concentrated, so it cuts cleanly." "Concentrated force," Hurrick murmured, like he was memorizing scripture. Della spent the next 20 minutes demonstrating. She cut paper into shapes. She cut twine into exact lengths. She even cut through a piece of thin cardboard, which really seemed to blow their minds. Each cut was accompanied by rapt attention and occasional small noises of awe that would have been adorable if they weren't coming from creatures with built-in weaponry. "Can we?" Plix started, then hesitated. "Can we try?" Della considered. Sharp objects, predator cubs, potential liability nightmare. Then again, they had literal claws. If they wanted to cut something, they had options. At least with scissors, there was a handle. "Carefully," she said, and handed the scissors to Hurrick. His large, clawed fingers closed around the handles with surprising delicacy. He opened and closed the blades experimentally, getting a feel for the mechanism. Then he positioned a piece of paper and attempted to cut. The result was clumsy, but successful. A wobbly line across the page. Hurrick's expression was pure triumph. Plix and Toowoomba took their turns, each managing to successfully cut paper. They handed the scissors between them like it was a sacred honor, trying different materials, different angles, discussing the mechanics in hushed, excited voices. When Della's shift ended and she packed up her supplies, the cubs watched her store the scissors with the intensity of monks watching a holy relic being locked away. "Thank you for showing us," Toomba said quietly. "The cutting thing." "Scissors," Della corrected with a smile. "And you're welcome." She left the youth wing feeling absurdly pleased with herself. Who knew that basic office supplies could be so thrilling? What Della didn't see, because she'd already left, was what happened next. The three cubs convened in their sleeping area, a semi-private alcove filled with cushions and personal belongings. They sat in a tight circle, and Hurrick raised his hand, extending his fingers. He opened and closed them in a scissoring motion. "Like this," he said seriously. "Two blades, meeting at a point." Plix mimicked the gesture. Open, close, open, close. His claws extended slightly, adding to the effect. "Concentrated force," he muttered. Toomba joined in, her smaller hands copying the motion. All three of them sat there, making scissor gestures at the air, opening and closing their fingers with intense concentration. "We need to practice," Hurrick declared, "until we understand it perfectly." And so they did. For the next hour, three apex predator cubs sat in their alcove, trying to cut the atmosphere itself, utterly serious about mastering this revelation. In the adjacent section, a group of Quilbane younglings watched through the transparent divider, their compound eyes reflecting confusion. One of them chittered to another in their native language, roughly translating to, "What are the scary ones doing?" The other Quilbane could only respond with the insectoid equivalent of a shrug. In the aquatic tank on the opposite side, young Learn floated near the glass, watching the scissors practice with their large, intelligent eyes. They'd seen strange behavior before, but this was new. And in her quarters, 3 decks away, Della catalogued her specimens and made notes for her actual job, completely unaware that she'd accidentally started a movement. The Recti cubs had discovered tools. Nothing would ever be quite the same. The next morning, Della returned to the youth wing for what was supposed to be another short coverage shift. The coordinator had cornered her in the corridor with a desperate expression and a promise of extra ration credits. "Just 4 hours," the woman had pleaded. "The regular staff is still dealing with the environmental system recalibration." Della had agreed, mostly because she was a pushover who couldn't say no to desperate people. Also, the ration credits would let her afford actual coffee instead of the synthetic sludge the ship dispensers called coffee. She entered the youth wing expecting the usual organized chaos. Younglings from various species engaged in their species-appropriate activities, supervised learning, controlled socialization. What she got instead was 3 Vrekti cubs pressed against the observation window of the equipment storage room, staring at the contents like they'd discovered buried treasure. "Morning," Della said cautiously. All 3 whipped around, their ears perked up in perfect synchronization. "Della!" Toomba bounded over with enthusiasm that was both heartwarming and mildly terrifying. "You're back!" "For a few hours, yes." Hurrick approached more sedately, but his tail was doing that swishing thing that suggested barely contained excitement. "We have questions." "Many questions," Plix added, joining them. "About tools." "Oh no." Della recognized that look. She'd seen it on graduate students who'd just discovered a new research obsession. She'd worn that look herself more times than she cared to admit. What kind of questions? Hurrick produced a data tablet from behind his back. On it was a list, a long list, organized by category. These cubs had made a spreadsheet. "We cataloged all the tools we observed you using yesterday," Hurrick explained with the seriousness of someone presenting a dissertation. "We have questions about function, mechanics, and application." Della took the tablet. The list was impressively thorough. Scissors, pen, tape dispenser, stapler, hole punch, paper clips, labels, string, containers with lids, and, inexplicably, the thing that makes papers stick together without string. "That would be the stapler," Della said, scrolling through. "This is very detailed." "We stayed up late working on it," Toomba admitted. Hurrick wanted to organize it by complexity. Plix wanted to organize it by danger potential. I suggested organizing it by frequency of use. "We compromised with multiple sorting categories," Hurrick said proudly. Della wasn't sure whether to be impressed or concerned. Probably both. "All right," she said, settling into a chair. "Let's go through your questions." The next hour was an impromptu lecture on basic human tools. Della explained mechanical advantage, leverage, friction, tension, and compression, using whatever examples she could find in the youth wing. The cubs absorbed every word like they were learning the secrets of the universe, which, in a way, they were. Other younglings began to drift over. A pair of quillbane younglings chittered amongst themselves, their antennae quivering with interest. The learn in their tank pressed against the transparent barrier, watching through the water. Even some of the other species, young, ones Della didn't know the names of, gathered at a respectful distance. Della had accidentally become the most popular attraction in the youth wing. "Can we see more?" Plix asked when she'd finished explaining how a lever worked. "More tools?" "I don't have many with me," Della admitted. "Just my basic supplies." "The dining area," Toomba suggested. "You eat there sometimes. You must use tools there." The kid had a point. Also, Della was getting hungry. "All right," she agreed. "Lunch field trip." The communal dining area was a large, multi-environment space designed to accommodate various species' needs. Atmospheric zones for different breathing requirements, temperature-controlled sections, specialized food preparation areas. It was lunch cycle, so the place was moderately busy with crew members and residents grabbing meals. Della headed for the human-compatible food dispensary. The three cubs followed so closely they were practically her shadow. Other diners noticed, naturally. A lone human trailed by three predator cubs was not exactly subtle. She collected her meal, a pre-packaged protein bar that claimed to be chicken-flavored but tasted like optimistic cardboard, a sealed container of mixed vegetables, and a can of preserved fruit. The fruit was the only thing worth eating, honestly. The cubs watched her carry the tray to a table, tracking every movement. Della sat. They sat across from her, three pairs of eyes fixed on her lunch. "Are you going to stare at me while I eat? Because that's a little unsettling." "We want to see the tools," Hurrick explained, unrepentant. "For eating?" Della picked up her fork. "I guess this counts." She demonstrated the fork, spearing a piece of vegetable. The cubs leaned in. "Puncture and lift," Plix observed. "Interesting. Do all humans use these?" Toomba asked. "Forks, pretty much. We also use spoons, knives, chopsticks, depending on the food and culture." She moved on to the protein bar, which required no tools, just depressing resignation. Then she reached for the fruit can. The can opener was standard issue, a simple rotary type with a turning handle and a cutting wheel. Della positioned it on the can's edge, clamped it down, and began to turn. The cubs went absolutely still. The cutting wheel bit into the metal lid, traveling around the circumference. A clean cut, the lid separating from the can with mechanical precision. Della removed the opener and lifted the lid free. "What?" Hurek breathed. "Was that?" "Can opener. For opening cans." "It cuts metal," Plix said, his voice climbing slightly. "It just cuts through metal. Like it's nothing." Della looked at the can opener in her hand, trying to see it through their eyes. To her, it was mundane. A kitchen tool, barely worth noticing. To them, apparently, it was a revelation. "The can is thin metal," she explained. "The opener uses a sharp wheel and leverage to puncture and cut. It's not that different from scissors, really, just designed for a specific purpose." "Can we?" Tuamba started. "No," Della interrupted gently. "This one's pretty sharp, and the metal edge of the can is dangerous. But I can show you how it works." She found an empty can in the recycling receptacle, checked to make sure the edge wasn't too sharp, and demonstrated the opener's mechanism, how the turning handle provided rotary force, how the cutting wheel was positioned to maintain constant contact with the rim, how the support wheel on the other side of the jaw kept everything stable. A small crowd had gathered, not just younglings now, but adults, crew members on their lunch breaks, watching a human explain a can opener to fascinated predator cubs. Someone in the back muttered something about humans and their obsession with tools. Della ignored them and continued her impromptu lesson. When she finished lunch and stood to leave, Hurek lingered. "Della, can I ask something?" "Sure." "Why do humans need so many tools? We've been taught that humans are weak, soft. But these tools," he gestured vaguely, "they don't seem like weakness." Della considered her answer carefully. "Humans are weak, compared to a lot of species. We're not as strong as you, not as fast, don't have natural weapons. But we survive anyway, because we're good at one thing: problem solving. Every tool is just a solution to a problem. Can't cut through tough material? Make scissors. Can't open a sealed container? Make a can opener? Can't reach something high? Make a ladder." "Solutions," Hurek repeated thoughtfully. "Exactly. We compensate for what we lack by making things that help us." The cub nodded slowly, processing. Then he rejoined his siblings, and Della watched them leave, heads together, talking in low voices. She had a feeling that conversation was going to continue for a while. That evening, in the cub's alcove, Plix attempted to open a spare food container with his claws alone. It was sealed, designed to preserve contents in ship storage. His claws scrabbled against the smooth metal surface, finding no purchase. He pushed harder, strained, managed to dent the container slightly, but couldn't breach it. "Stop," Hurek said. "You'll hurt yourself." "I want to see if I can do it," Plix insisted. "Without tools, like we're supposed to." He tried again, pushing a claw tip into the seal. The claw bent at an awkward angle. Pain shot through the digit. Plix yelped and pulled back, cradling his hand. A small trickle of blood welled up where the claw had partially torn from its bed. "Idiot," Tumba said, but her voice was worried. She grabbed the first aid supplies from their storage cubby. While she tended to Plix's injury, Hurek stared at the unopened container. Then at his own claws. Then at his hands, which he raised and positioned in that scissor motion they'd been practicing. Something clicked in his mind. "We're thinking about this wrong," he said slowly. His siblings looked at him. Della said tools aren't weakness. They're solutions. We've been taught that using anything except our bodies makes us soft. But what if that's not true? What if tools make us stronger? "The instructors won't like that," Plix said. wincing as Tumba applied antiseptic. The instructors aren't here right now, Hurek pointed out. The next morning, when Della arrived for her shift, she found something unexpected. The cubs had rearranged part of their space. They'd gathered objects, discarded containers, pieces of spare material, broken equipment parts. Nothing dangerous, just things. They were experimenting. "What's all this?" Della asked. Toowoomba looked up from where she was trying to use a flat piece of metal to pry open a container. "We're testing different ways to solve problems without just using force." "We thought about what you said," Hurek added, "about humans compensating. We want to understand how." Plix, sporting a bandaged claw, was attempting to tie a knot in a piece of cord. His large fingers made it clumsy, but he was persistent. Della felt something warm bloom in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or hope. "Want some help?" she offered. 3 faces lit up. She spent the next hour teaching basic knots, showing them how tension and friction could hold things together. How to use flat objects as prying tools. How to stack items to reach higher places. Other younglings joined in. The Quilbane discovered they could manipulate small objects with surprising dexterity. The Learn, from their tank, demonstrated how water pressure could be used to move things. The youth wing transformed into an impromptu workshop. And in the doorway, unnoticed at first, stood Vrelish. The Vrekti education overseer was a scarred veteran, his fur marked with the evidence of decades of combat. He'd been training cubs in the traditional ways since before Della was born. He believed in strength, in natural ability, in the warrior's path. He did not, generally, believe in tools. His expression as he watched the scene was unreadable. Vrelish watched for exactly 90 seconds before his growl cut through the cheerful chaos of the improvised workshop. "What is happening here?" The room went silent. Younglings from multiple species froze mid-activity. The cubs, in particular, looked like they'd been caught doing something far worse than learning basic mechanical principles. Della straightened, meeting the warrior teacher's eyes. Up close, Vrelish was impressive in the way that mountains were impressive. Massive, immovable, and vaguely threatening just by existing. His shoulders were twice the width of hers, his claws scarred from what she assumed were countless battles or training exercises. "Teaching," Della said simply. The cubs had questions. "Questions about soft species weakness," Vrelish said, stalking into the room. The other younglings scattered to their designated areas. Only the 3 cubs remained, frozen between their alcove and where Della stood. "Questions about adaptation," Della corrected. "Tools." The word came out like an accusation. "You're teaching them to rely on tools, to become dependent on external objects instead of their own strength." "I'm teaching them options. Options make warriors weak, indecisive. A Vrekti who cannot hunt with claws and fangs is not a Vrekti worth training." The cubs flinched at that. Hurek's ears flattened against his skull. Tumba's tail tucked slightly. Della felt her temper spark, which was generally a bad idea when facing down someone who could literally tear her in half. But she'd never been great at self-preservation when she was angry. "That's ridiculous," she said flatly. Vrelish's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. It's ridiculous. You're telling me that learning new skills, understanding different approaches to problems, gaining knowledge about how things work, somehow makes them weaker? That's not training. That's limiting them. It is preserving what makes Rekti strong. Our physical prowess, our natural abilities." "And what happens when physical prowess isn't enough?" Della challenged. "What happens when they face a problem that can't be solved by being bigger or stronger or faster, Just fail? Give up? Die? A true warrior finds a way. Yes, exactly. Finding a way. That's what tools are. Different ways to solve problems. Della gestured at the scattered objects. Your cubs weren't abandoning their claws. They were learning how to think beyond them. Vrelish moved closer, towering over her. You are human. Your species needs tools because you are prey. Soft. Built for running and hiding. My cubs are predators. They need no crutches. Crutches, Della repeated, her voice dropping dangerously low. You think scissors are crutches? They are compensation for inadequacy. Really? Because from where I'm standing, they're force multipliers, efficiency enhancers. They let me do in seconds what would take minutes with just my hands and do it better. That's not weakness. That's intelligence. The warrior teacher's tail lashed once, a sign of agitation. You do not understand the Recti way. Then help me understand, Della said, shifting tactics. Explain to me why you're threatened by your cubs learning. I am not threatened by... You are, though. You're scared they'll realize there's more than one way to be strong. The room was silent enough to hear the environmental systems humming. Vrelish stared at Della with an expression that cycled through anger, offense, and something that might have been grudging respect. You are bold for prey, he said finally. I'm a scientist. We're professionally curious and annoyingly persistent. A long moment passed. Then Vrelish's posture shifted slightly, less aggressive. You believe tools do not weaken? I believe tools reveal intelligence, and I believe your cubs are smart enough to learn both ways. Traditional Recti combat skills and tool use. They don't have to choose. Prove it. What? Prove that tool use is not compensation for weakness. Show my cubs why your species survived long enough to reach the stars, if you are as soft as you appear. It was a challenge. Obviously, a challenge. Probably a terrible idea to accept. Fine, Della said. When and where? Tomorrow, mid-cycle, the multi-purpose training bay. I will gather observers. Vrelish's eyes glinted. If you fail to convince me, you will cease these lessons. The cubs will return to traditional training only. And if I succeed? Then perhaps old teachers can learn new things. He left without waiting for a response, his departure as dramatic as his entrance. Della stood there, processing what she'd just agreed to, and wondering if her mouth had finally written a check her body couldn't cash. That was amazing, Hurrick breathed behind her. She turned. All three cubs were staring at her with something approaching awe. That was stupid, Della corrected. I just challenged a warrior teacher to a demonstration I haven't prepared for and don't have materials for. But you stood up to Vrelish, Tumba said. No one stands up to Vrelish. We will help, Plix added firmly. Whatever you need. Della looked at their earnest faces and sighed. I'm going to need rope, lots of rope, and anything that can work as a pulley, and some way to demonstrate mechanical advantage that won't get me laughed out of the room. The cubs exchanged glances and identical grins. We know where the equipment storage is, Hurrick said. By the next mid-cycle, word had spread. Apparently, a human challenging a Recti warrior teacher was newsworthy. The multi-purpose training bay, normally used for combat drills and physical conditioning, was packed. Crew members lined the observation platforms. Younglings from multiple species were given front-row positions. Della spotted Quilbane learn in mobile tank units, and at least 4 other species she couldn't name. Great. An audience. That would make failing so much more humiliating. The cubs had helped her gather materials. Rope, pulleys salvaged from maintenance supplies, a lever made from a reinforced pole, an inclined plane constructed from storage ramps, and several other basic machines. Nothing fancy, just fundamental physics. Vrel-ish stood at the center of the bay, arms crossed, looking skeptical. Della took a breath and stepped forward. "Thanks for coming. I know this seems odd, a human giving a demonstration to predator species about tools, but that's kind of the point." She gestured to the equipment laid out behind her. "Humans aren't strong. We're not fast. We don't have claws or fangs or venom or armored hides. By all rights, we should have gone extinct on our homeworld thousands of generations ago." A few chuckles from the audience. Self-deprecating humor, apparently universal. "But we didn't. Want to know why?" Della grabbed the rope and pulley system. "Because we learned to make the universe work for us instead of against us." She demonstrated the pulley first. A weight that she couldn't lift directly became manageable when the rope was threaded through the pulley system. Basic mechanical advantage. The observers watched with polite interest. Then the lever. She positioned it under an even heavier object, placed a fulcrum, and pushed down on the long end. The object lifted. "Force multiplication," she explained. "I'm not getting stronger. I'm using physics. More interest now." She moved through the inclined plane, showing how rolling a heavy barrel up a ramp required less force than lifting it straight up, even though the total work was the same. But she could see she wasn't quite reaching them. This was interesting, sure, but not convincing. Time for the real demonstration. "Here's what you need to understand about humans," Della said, her voice carrying across the bay. "We're not just tool users. Lots of species use tools. We're tool obsessors. We make tools to make tools to make better tools. But more than that, we're survivors. Persistence. Predators." She pulled up a holographic display, images from Earth's history that she'd loaded the night before. Our ancestors didn't outrun prey. They followed it. For days. Until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. We didn't need venom. We made poison. We didn't need thick hides. We made armor. We didn't need to be the strongest, because we learned to coordinate, to plan, to adapt. The images shifted. Stone tools, fire, spears, bows, eventually spacecraft. Every single advancement came from the same question. How do we solve this problem? And when we couldn't solve it with our bodies, we made something that could. Hurek raised his hand. Della nodded at him. "But you're still soft," the cub said, not meanly, just stating a fact. "How did your ancestors survive actual predators? The ones that wanted to eat them?" There it was, the real question. Della smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "We made them scared of us." She pulled up more images, hunting traps, coordinated group tactics, persistence hunting runs that lasted for days, humans with spears facing down creatures 10 times their size. We out-thought them, out-planned them, outlasted them. We hunted megafauna to extinction. We domesticated wolves into dogs. We settled every environment on our planet, from frozen tundra to burning deserts to dense jungles. Not because we were built for those places, but because we refused to accept limitations. The bay was utterly silent now. "So when you ask if tools are weakness?" Della held up the scissors she'd brought, the same ones from that first day. "These aren't compensation. They're proof that humans are adaptable predators. We can hunt anything, eat almost anything, live almost anywhere. And we never, ever stop improving our tools." She demonstrated one final time, the scissors cutting through thick fabric that she'd struggled to tear with her hands moments before. "This is efficiency. Why waste energy when you can conserve it? Why struggle when you can solve? Tumba stood up from where she'd been sitting with her siblings. Are humans predators too, then? The question hung in the air like a challenge, innocent but profound. Della met the cub's eyes. Humans are something scarier than predators. We're adaptable. We can hunt anything, eat almost anything, survive almost anywhere. And most importantly, we never stop changing our approach. A predator that can't adapt goes extinct. Humans? We adapt to adaptation itself. She held up the scissors again. This tool is thousands of generations old in concept, but we keep refining it, making it better, finding new uses. That's what makes humans dangerous, not our strength. Vrel-ish had been standing motionless through the entire demonstration. Now he moved forward, his footsteps heavy on the training bay floor. He stopped in front of Della, looking down at her from his considerable height. "Show me," he said quietly. "Show you what?" "Use those scissors. Cut something I cannot tear." Della looked around. The training bay had various materials for obstacle courses and equipment. She spotted a section of reinforced synthetic mesh, the kind used for safety barriers. It was designed to be tear-resistant. She retrieved a sample, held it up. "Can you tear this?" Vrelish took it in both hands. His muscles bunched under his fur. He pulled, claws digging in, applying force that would have ripped a human apart. The mesh stretched slightly but held. He handed it back, breathing a bit harder. "It is designed to resist tearing." "Right." Della positioned her scissors and cut. The blades sliced through the mesh like it was paper. A clean line, no effort. 3 seconds. She handed both pieces back to Vrelish. The warrior teacher stared at the cut mesh for a long moment. Then at Della. Then at the scissors in her hand. "You made that look effortless," he said slowly. "Because it was. That's the point. The scissors concentrate force at a precise point. The mesh is designed to distribute force, to resist tearing. But cutting? That's a different kind of stress. The tool exploits the material's weakness." "Strategy," Vrelish murmured. "Finding weakness and exploiting it." "Exactly. That's very recti, isn't it? Except instead of just physical weakness, we look for structural weakness, design weakness, any weakness." Something shifted in the warrior teacher's expression. Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of it. He turned to address the assembled observers. "I have spent my life believing that strength comes only from within, from body, from skill, from natural ability." His voice carried across the bay. "But I am watching a being half my size accomplish what I could not, using knowledge and a simple tool." He looked back at Della. "This is not weakness. This is something else. Something I must consider." "Does this mean—" Hurek started. "It means," Vrelish interrupted, "that perhaps old teachers have become too rigid, too convinced of their own correctness." He paused. "I would like to learn more about human tool philosophy, and I will not prevent the cubs from these lessons." Relief flooded through Della. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. I will be observing. And if I believe this path leads them astray, I will intervene." "Fair enough." The demonstration broke up, observers filtering out with conversations buzzing. The cubs practically tackled Della with enthusiasm, chattering about everything they'd seen and learned. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. The youth wing transformed. What had been separate species sections became a collaborative learning space. The cubs integrated tool use into everything, their natural predator coordination combining with mechanical understanding to create something formidable. Hurek discovered that scissors, in his clawed hands, became precision instruments. His natural dexterity, plus the tool's efficiency, meant he could cut with frightening accuracy. He started teaching younger cubs the proper grip, the correct angle, the way to let the tool do the work. Plix had created something he called a reach extender, basically a simple grabber made from spare parts. It let him manipulate objects at a distance or in tight spaces where his hands wouldn't fit. Other younglings started making their own versions, adapted to their particular physiology. Tumba appointed herself the teacher of leverage. She'd set up an entire section dedicated to demonstrating fulcrums, levers, and mechanical advantage. Even the Quilbane younglings, who were naturally strong for their size, found her lessons valuable. Della had been officially appointed as cross-species innovation instructor. It came with slightly better quarters and actual coffee rations, which felt like winning the lottery. Vrelish kept his word. He observed, asked questions, and slowly, grudgingly, began to incorporate tool theory into traditional Vrekti training. Not replacing natural ability, but augmenting it. It was, Della thought on the third week, almost perfect. Then the ship shuddered. The impact alarms blared through every corridor, a sound designed to wake the dead and terrify the living. Emergency lighting flickered on as main power fluctuated. Della was in her quarters when it happened. She grabbed the wall for stability as the ship lurched again. The intercom crackled. All personnel to stations. We have entered an unexpected asteroid debris field. Multiple impacts to sectors 4 through 9. Damage control teams responding. All non-essential personnel shelter in place. Sectors 4 through 9. Della pulled up a mental map of the ship's layout. The youth wing was in Sector 6. She was moving before conscious thought caught up, racing through corridors as crew members rushed past. Another shudder, smaller this time, rattled through the hull. The youth wing's main entrance was sealed, emergency protocols engaged. Through the transparent barrier, Della could see younglings being ushered into the reinforced shelter areas by the adult supervisors who'd been on duty. She did a quick count. Most species accounted for. The Quilbane were clustered together, their group cohesion keeping them calm. The learned tanks had been secured. Other species she recognized were being guided to safety. But she didn't see the cubs. A crew member rushed past. Della grabbed his arm. The Vrekti cubs, where are they? Secondary alcove section, I think. That whole corridor sealed automatically when the hull breach sensors triggered. Breach? There's a breach? Microfractures in Sector 6 external hull. Nothing catastrophic yet, but environmental controls are failing in some sections. We're trying to... Another alarm cut him off. He pulled away. I have to go. Della pressed against the barrier, trying to see into the sealed corridor. The environmental failure would explain the emergency seal, but if the cubs were trapped in there, with failing life support... Vrelish appeared beside her, moving with surprising silence for someone his size. My cubs? Sealed in the secondary section. Do you have access override? No. Emergency seals require manual reset from inside or command authorization. His claws scraped against the EG barrier. The adults on duty are handling the main group. No one else was in that section. Can you contact them? Individual communicators don't work through emergency barriers. Interference from the shielding. Another shudder, smaller, but the lights flickered again. Through the barrier, Della could see the door to the secondary section, sealed tight. A panel beside it showed red, environmental controls failing. Then movement, small shapes at the door, 3 of them, the cubs. They were visible through the door's small window, and Della could see them trying something. Hurrick was examining the door mechanism. Plix was checking the panel. Toomba was looking around, presumably for options. "They're trapped," Vrelish growled. "The door is emergency sealed. Adult Recti warriors have tried to force those doors in drills. They're built to withstand direct assault." "What about the manual override?" "There." He pointed to a maintenance access panel low on the wall beside the door. "But it requires reaching through to the mechanism behind. The access space is small. Adult hands cannot fit, and the internal components are delicate. Claws would destroy them." Della watched the cubs through the window. They were clearly assessing the situation. Hurrick was pointing at something, the maintenance panel. Then Toomba was pulling something from their alcove storage, running back to her brothers. Della's breath caught. Scissors. The cubs had scissors. Through the window, she watched Hurrick examine the maintenance panel. It was covered with a protective mesh, the same kind of reinforced synthetic that Della had cut during her demonstration. Plix produced a small light source they must have kept in their alcove. Toomba held it steady, while Hurrick positioned the scissors. "What are they doing?" Vrelish asked, his voice tight with worry. "Problem-solving," Della whispered. Hurrick cut the mesh. His natural coordination plus weeks of practice made it quick work. The mesh fell away, revealing the tight access space behind. But there was a problem. The override mechanism was deep inside, behind a maze of conduits and supports. Even the cub's smaller hands would struggle to reach it without damaging something critical. Plix was examining something else now, a length of flexible material from their practice supplies. He was tying it to something, creating a loop. An extension tool, like the reach extender he'd made, but improvised. Della couldn't breathe. She was watching everything she'd taught them being put into practice under actual crisis conditions. Toomba's light illuminated the access space. Hurrick guided the improvised extender through the narrow gap, using the loop to hook around the override lever. Plix provided stability, holding the base steady. Pull. The lever moved. The door's emergency seal disengaged with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The cubs tumbled out into the main area just as supervising adults rushed over. They were checked for injuries, for environmental exposure. But they were fine. Shaken, but unhurt. Vrelish was through the barrier the moment emergency protocols allowed, gathering his cubs with a ferocity that was pure parental instinct. Della watched from the other side, her legs suddenly weak. They'd done it. 3 younglings had solved a problem that adult warriors couldn't force their way through. Not with strength, not with natural weapons, with tools and thinking. Hours later, after the crisis had fully passed and repairs were underway, Vrelish found Della in the observation lounge. She was staring out at the stars, drinking real coffee and trying to stop her hands from shaking. "My cubs saved themselves," he said without preamble. "And possibly others, if that corridor had remained sealed much longer." "They're smart kids," Della replied. "They used your scissors, the original pair, from the first day. Hurrick had asked to borrow them for practice. I noticed they were missing from my kit." Vrelish sat beside her, the chair creaking under his weight. "I have been spacefaring for 30 cycles. Recti have been spacefaring for generations. We trade for ship improvements, for weapons, for technology, but we do not create. We have not, in all that time, truly innovated." Della stayed quiet, sensing he needed to talk. "We thought our strength was enough. Our natural abilities would carry us forward. But my cubs just saved themselves with a human tool and human thinking." He looked at her. "What else have we been too proud to learn?" "Everyone has strengths," Della said carefully. "Recti have incredible natural abilities, but maybe those abilities become even better when combined with other approaches. I would like to propose something to my government, Vrelish said. An exchange. We send observers to human worlds. Learn your innovation methods, your tool philosophy. You send teachers to Recti training centers. Show our young that strength comes in many forms. Della blinked. That's a significant proposal. Today proved it necessary. They sat in silence, watching the stars drift past. The next day, Della returned to the youth wing to find the cubs demonstrating scissor technique to a newly arrived group of younglings from a species she didn't recognize. Hurek was explaining leverage and concentration of force. Plix was showing proper grip and safety. Toowoomba was supervising practice cuts on scrap materials. They'd gone from students to teachers in 3 weeks. Della stood in the doorway, watching her accidental revolutions spread. She'd come to study plants. Instead, she'd taught predator cubs that the scariest thing in the universe wasn't teeth or claws or strength. It was the willingness to pick something up and figure out what it could do. Hurek noticed her and waved. His siblings looked up too, their faces bright with enthusiasm. "Della, come show them the can opener trick." She laughed and joined them, surrounded by younglings from a dozen species, all eager to learn about tools and thinking and solving problems. Somewhere in the back of the group, she saw Vrelish observing. He caught her eye and nodded once, a gesture of respect between teachers. And in the corner, almost forgotten, a pair of scissors lay on a supply table. Simple, mundane, worn from years of use. Just a tool, but also a bridge between species, a key to understanding, and proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can teach isn't a technique or a skill. It's a new way of seeing the world. The cubs continued their demonstration, their voices mixing with questions from the new students, and Della thought that maybe, just maybe, the Unity Initiative was working. One scissor, cut at a time.